It's no secret that Florida Gators have a tough road ahead of them. Everyone's been talking about their schedule going into the 2024 season, and Billy Napier is definitely on the hot seat. Today, we take a deep dive into the Florida Gators and take a look at what we can see optimistically for this team, but also look at that schedule and talk about what needs to improve for success to happen this year. Before we do that, though, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. It goes a long way in helping the channel and the deep dive series. And let's dive into the Florida Gators. Obviously, Billy Napier is on the hot seat. I don't think that's really a secret to anybody that's been following Florida football for the last couple of years. And it's hard to win in the SEC. There's no doubt about that. No one's questioning that, but it also means that you're required to play at a higher level and compete at a higher level. And sometimes you meet those standards and then sometimes you don't. And it's really hard to win when you're taking over a program that needs rebuilding. And Billy Napier has been doing what he can, but obviously it's been taking some time and the fan base is growing restless. 5-7 season last year did not get the job done. And it's going to be tough to improve upon that. But also there is tremendous potential for Billy Napier to be coach of the year if he's able to win a certain number of games. And we'll dive into the schedule later in this video, but one thing I think you have to look at is you look at both offense and defense. And while I think that there were some aspects of both sides of the ball that weren't great, you also have a lot of opportunities to improve, and you don't need to take huge strides. A lot of these statistical categories, Florida finished between 45 and 75 for most of them. And if you're able to get more into that 40 to 50 range for most of those things, you're looking at a much better team overall. Again, you do not have to take huge strides to improve, but you do need to take some steps. And it's going to be hard against key competition, but I think that this group is capable of doing that. So, looking at this from an optimistic point of view, there's a lot of things that Florida can do better. But again, you don't have to completely reinvent yourself. So, that's one positive if you're a Florida fan or if you're hoping that Billy Napier can get the job done. The numbers can show you some really positive things. Now, one thing that I have to commend Billy Napier for is that he did not sit around and wait to see what the season brought to him. He entered the transfer portal to find talent to bring in to replace certain players. And I think that he did a really good job of bringing in key positions to contribute. Now, when you look at some of the guys that he brings in, Jamari DK and Elijah Badger are probably the two bigger names that you're going to see at the wide receiver position. You definitely needed some help at that position. Armani McLean coming in, obviously made headlines when he transferred from Colorado, and now he is at Florida. Asa Turner kind of flew under the radar. The former Washington safety is now with the Gators, and he is someone who I think this staff expects big things from, and he's a veteran who has playoff experience. That is a huge addition for this team as well. DJ Douglas coming from Tulane will probably join him at some point, so that will be a great duo to watch. And you brought in a couple other players to contribute on both sides of the ball as well. You lose some players that I think that will hurt. Losing a guy like Trevor Etienne always is going to do a little bit of damage, but also with what you have returning in the backfield, you don't feel too bad about that. Obviously, you'd love to have Trevor Etienne back in this backfield and more depth, but I think that you have to look for what you have and work with that going forward. We'll dive into the offense because everyone is going to pay attention to what the quarterback position is going to do, and for obvious reasons. We'll start with Graham Mertz because that is who's going to be the starter to begin the season for the Florida Gators. Someone who I think that he had a better year than a lot of people give him credit for. Throwing for nearly 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions. If you're a Wisconsin Badgers fan, this is kind of what you were anticipating he would do with the Badgers. You kind of expected him to be more of a threat as a passer, and he made good throws. He made smart decisions. And he's capable of making a lot of good throws for this Florida offense. So he is someone that's going to be a weapon for this team in 2024. I think the biggest thing that we're going to talk about, though, is what happens if he struggles. Now, last year, if you were going to expect struggles from Graham Mertz, it was probably going to be last year. In your first year in the SEC, I think people expected him to kind of struggle a little bit. right off the bat, or maybe as the season progressed and you get to tougher competition, but he didn't really do that for the most part. He was very good at making smart decisions, getting the ball to his playmakers, and that should help him once again, even with the tougher schedule. Everyone's going to be paying attention to DJ Lagway, though. And the first sign of trouble, you know that people are going to be calling for Lagway to take over. And that's just the nature of the quarterback position. That's the nature of having such a talented quarterback, a talented freshman behind your starting quarterback. DJ Lagway, I think, is going to be a special player. But I think Florida benefits more long term if Graham Mertz strives right off the bat. Because if Florida is playing well, it's because Graham Mertz is able to throw the ball really well. Once again, take care of the football. And that means that this offense is going to put up points, and you don't need DJ to play a prominent role. Now, you probably still see him from time to time. I think that Billy Napier and the staff will find a way to get him involved, even if they're going to redshirt him. But if you're a Florida fan, you want Graham Mertz to play well, because if he struggles early, that's probably going to mean that Billy Napier is on his way out the door. You don't want that. You don't want the struggles from your quarterback, and you don't want the struggles for your team, to be completely honest. So having a guy like DJ Lagway sit behind Graham Mertz and learn the position, I think is more beneficial than seeing Lagway take over early on. And it's easy to see why people want him. He's super talented. You saw him in the spring game. You've seen what he could do at the high school level. So he is someone that's going to be special. He will be someone that people really want to see throw the football and take over as quarterback. But you need Graham Mertz to run this offense for the entire season if you want to see the team success that you want. Now, in the backfield next to him, Montrell Johnson, really, I think that losing a guy like Trevor Etienne means that you were kind of hoping that Johnson would also stick around, and he did. And he's wearing number one, which is a very important number for the Florida program. So he is going to be a focal point of this offense, and it's easy to see why. When you look at last year, over 1,000 total yards of offense, whether rushing or receiving, and six total touchdowns. He is someone who's going to be really fun to watch in the backfield. The offensive line obviously has to open things up, but I think that this group has some talented players that can do exactly that. Trayon Webb behind him steps into a new role, or maybe it's going to be Cam Carroll. I think Cam Carroll is looking to bounce back and prove that he was worthy of transferring from Tulane to Florida and finding ways to get on the field. So that's definitely a backfield that has a couple of players that need to step up. But I also think that you have a couple of good options to run the ball and take the workload of the carries. And then again, I think with the quarterback position, you want Lagway to sit and redshirt. And then a guy like Clay Millen could also get some experience. So you have talent to mold DJ Lagway into what you want him to be. And that's really exciting if you're a Florida fan. That's what you want to happen. And it's going to mean good things for Florida as a whole. And the passing attack is going to thrive with Graham Mertz, and the team is going to be better if that passing attack is doing really well. Because when you look at this passing attack last year, finished 41st. There's reason to believe that they could be better, especially with the players that you brought in. Now, everyone's going to pay attention to Trey Wilson. That's going to be the big name that everyone should pay attention to. And if you go back and watch his film, it's easy to see why. A very explosive player with the football in his hands when he has the opportunity to get in space, a little bit possession receiver at time too. I mean, you look at he averaged 8.8 yards per catch. So obviously the doesn't scream explosive, but he has the capability of being explosive. But I think that he's going to do a lot of good work in the short to intermediate routes. And guys like Chimere DK and Elijah Badger, you're going to see those two really take on prominent roles deep downfield. Now, Badger's been one of the most underrated wide receivers in college football because he's been on Arizona State, a team that has struggled mightily over the last couple of years. And I think that Elijah Badger deserves of most of the transfers that we'll talk about. Elijah Badger is right up there with most of them as being deserving of finding a new home and finding a team that could compete with better competition. And maybe you didn't pick the best team in terms of finding success. But again, there's reason to be optimistic about this team. And Elijah Badger is a reason for that. Getting Graham Mertz weapons downfield is going to be a big part of this offense going to another level. So you get Elijah Badger, who finally has more talent around him than he did at Arizona State. That could mean 1,000-yard season for him. Now, Chimere DK is interesting because similar to Graham Mertz, you expected better things from him at Wisconsin, and you just didn't get it. Now, there's a combination of things that's going on with the Wisconsin transfers. The Wisconsin offense has been so outdated for so long, and they just didn't have the explosive weapons that you needed to be successful in this new era of college football. You just simply didn't. And that's something that needed to change. And they found ways to change under Luke Fickell, but some of the older guys wanted new opportunities. DK is one of them. Now, if those two can get the job done downfield, Ray Wilson's going to have a big year as well, but it also means that they're having good years too. So that's a trio to definitely keep an eye on. I think that the majority of the talent behind them is ready to contribute as well. This is not just going to be a three-headed attack. You're going to see guys like Marcus Burke, Andy Jean, and Khalil Jackson take more prominent roles as well. And I think that they are ready to do that. So if someone is not meeting the standard or they're hurt or whatever, you have talent behind them. So I think there's good depth at the receiver position. It's just maybe a little bit more unproven on the second group of receivers. Carlos Burlingham is an interesting tight end, 289 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. He is expected to take on a bigger role in the offense as well. So you have guys that are ready to step up. The opportunities are in front of them, and it's just a matter of finding ways to take those steps, finding ways to get open, help your quarterback a little bit more. And that's going to mean big things for this offense. Now, one of the things that Billy Napier has done a really good job of at his time at Louisiana and what is expected of him at Florida is the offensive line. The offensive line has been a big reason why Billy Napier has gotten a promotion to Florida. His lines at Louisiana were one of the biggest and also some of the best in the Sun Belt. And he brought a couple transfers with him when he went to Florida. And now everyone's expecting him to try and do the same thing with the Gators. And I think that you have good size, especially when you look on the right side of the line. Cameron Waits, a former Louisiana transfer, 6'8", 350 pounds. Damian George Jr., a former Alabama transfer, 6'6", 362 pounds. So size is definitely not a problem. Even on the left side, Austin Barber's 6'6", 316, and Najee Harris is 6'3", 323. So you have pretty good size to handle life in the SEC and handle life in the trenches. Jake Slaughter is a very underrated center. I think that he's a good leader to kind of be the leader of this offensive line and help Graham Mertz. His return is huge as well, just as much as Graham Mertz return is huge. I think Jake Slaughter coming back was a huge win for Florida. And the offensive line, like I said, this is an offense that can take a step forward. And you have a couple of new players stepping into new roles. Waits and Harris are going to be two of those guys. So you have some concerns right off the bat, but you also have experienced players that can help them get up to speed and get where this offense needs to go. Behind them, I am a little bit concerned about the experience, but also you have Devin Manuel coming from Arkansas. You have Brandon Crenshaw Dixon coming in from San Diego State. Both of those guys have good experience at the tackle positions. And then from there, can this youth that you have in Rod Kearney, Bryce Levette, and Christian Williams, can those guys step up and take on bigger roles in this offense? Again, Florida's biggest thing probably this year is when certain players take that next step. And that's talking about you guys like Graham Mertz taking on another step to being a better quarterback, Trey Wilson becoming a more prominent, explosive player, backup running backs taking those steps, backup linemen taking steps to be ready to play. Because if someone goes down, you need depth. You need depth in this conference. And the offensive line obviously plays a huge role in what this offense can do in 2024. But you should feel pretty good about where this group is at. Flipping to the defensive side of the ball, this defense, again, this was the worst group of the two between the offense and the defense. But at the same time, there's talent on this defense that could be really fun. The defensive line is another example of that. And when you look at what they have available, you have really exciting potential of this group. And I think that you have guys ready and hungry to take the next step in their journey to being an SEC type player. You start with a guy like Jackson, a former Memphis transfer, didn't really live up to expectations in 2023. So you're hoping that he can turn things around in 2024. But you also saw some good things from him. Obviously, the production didn't really stand out. But one thing that you'll notice is that the nose tackle position is going to be absolutely huge for Florida this year. And when you look at what they have coming back, you have Cam Jackson coming back at defensive back. You have Caleb Banks. You have Desmond Watson, arguably the biggest player in college football. So the trenches are going to be huge for Florida, both as like literally huge and also their importance in this team success. Tyree Sapp is someone who needs to take a step forward as a pass rusher. I think that Florida really needs a big year from him, and we'll see what he can do with that. But you're seeing lots of guys. I think that Caleb Banks is set to have a big year. I'm excited to see what he can do. He is someone that I think this coaching staff really is excited about heading into 2024. And it's really easy to see why. He's someone who has a good frame, someone who is capable of making those big time plays. It's just going to come down to consistency. So you have those guys up front. We talked about Desmond Watson, Joey Slackman coming in from Penn. That was a huge depth piece for this defense. So that's another guy to keep an eye on there. And then when you flip to the linebackers, this is another group that has a couple of pieces to figure out, but whoever plays with Shamar James should thrive. Shamar James is a talented player for this Florida defense, a natural playmaker who is ready to take another step in his production. 54 tackles last year, 5.5 tackles for loss. I think that whoever gets to play with him could expect some big things. And one of the positions we'll look at next to him is we have Grayson Howard here, but a guy like Derek Wingo could be in that role as well. A guy like RJ Moten could be in the rotation as well. So you have options. You have talented players. Wingo is player that this staff really likes. 17 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Grayson Howard comes in from South Carolina, so he is definitely someone that they were intrigued by, got him in the transfer portal. And RJ Moten is ready to take a step. I think that he is ready to be a larger contributor for this defense, and that'll be really fun to watch as well. Justice Boone is someone who at the jack position is really intriguing. You also have plenty of competition behind him. TJ Searcy and Kelby Collins should push him for time. That's a position that should see good depth and plenty of competition in fall camp. So you have talented players and you have options upon options. So it's not like this again. The one thing I'll say with Florida, yes, you have concerns about what's going to happen this year, but also you have plenty of reasons to be excited. You have plenty of reasons for optimism, and that's really what the offseason, for the most part, is going to be about: is being optimistic about your team and getting excited about what they could do in 2024. And I'm excited to see what this team is capable of doing. Another group that I'm excited to see take another step and improve back to and getting close, not close, but getting working towards, I should say, the level that they used to play at. Florida's defensive backfield used to be a really talented group and an NFL factory, if you will. And I think that this group has the talent to get back to that point. Specifically, when you look at Jason Marshall and Devin Moore, you have two talented players that when you look at stats, and it's really hard for the secondary because the stats are kind of misleading when you just look at a basic box score. Jason Marshall and Devin Moore can play at the next level. I mean, Moore comes in at 6'3", 197 pounds, so he has a good frame. And Jason Marshall has shown that he can be a big time player for Florida. That has been shown before. It just hasn't been consistent. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. That's one thing to note is, can he get back to that point? That's probably the biggest question for Florida's secondary. And Jason Marshall can answer a lot of those questions. We talked about Asa Turner. He joins Jordan Castell, who led the team on the back end. You'd like to see him make a few less plays this year, but you also know that he is capable of doing that. Asa Turner comes in with plenty of experience. Like I mentioned before, he just played in the college football playoff, so he knows what quality play looks like. He knows what winning football looks like. And you add him to a secondary that's looking to take a step. I think that's a great combination for that group. Sharif Denson, is going to play the nickelback position, someone who is taking on, again, another team here, a bigger role in the defense. Keep an eye on what he can do there. There's plenty of options behind that group. When you look at the cornerback position, you have Hermione McLean coming in from Colorado. That's obviously going to be the biggest one that people will talk about. We'll see what he can do and push for time. Jakeem Jackson and Dijon Johnson are two other corners to keep an eye on there. The safety position gets good depth. You bring in Triquez Bridges from Oregon, someone who could be more of a factor. He would play corner for Oregon, and I think that he has good size, but also he is someone who I think is just waiting for his opportunity. And he showed, especially in the Washington game, he showed flashes of what he could do. So that could be an underrated transfer for Florida. DJ Douglas, we mentioned earlier from Tulane, that's another guy to keep an eye on. A really exciting player for Florida if he can find a way to, like I said, be consistent. And if the injuries are hitting this defense, especially the secondary, pretty hard, you have good options behind them. I think that you just have a matter of how deep is this rotation, how much experience do the guys behind them get. That's probably the biggest thing that you're going to have with Florida. And again, this is a Florida secondary that used to be a really elite group, and you every single year had guys going to the NFL or preparing to go to the NFL. You just had that factory, if you will, ready to go. And I think that they can get back to that point. You just have to take a big step this year. And I know that this team has the talent to do so. It's just going to be an uphill battle. That's just part of where you're at as Florida. You are just in a spot where you're not necessarily solidified in terms of your confidence. You don't feel that you're in a good spot as a team, but you are in a good enough spot to take that step forward. Now, when you look at the strengths and concerns of this team, to me, they're fairly obvious. But again, there's also some. I think there's a lot of things right in the middle. They're not a strength, but they're also not a big concern. The running back position to me is going to be a potential strength depending on the health of Montreal Johnson. Wide receiver is going to be a strength for me as well. And I think that when you look at the linebacker position, it feels like it's in a good place too. You could probably put the defensive line here as well. I feel like that's a good place for that group there. But again, I guess if you want to pick one of those four to go in kind of that middle where they're not a strength concern, probably running back just for the lack of depth. I just really like where that group is at. Concerns, the schedule, that's pretty obvious. We'll dive into that. That's also going to be the X factor is how essentially how this team handles the schedule. And then O-line depth probably is a concern right now, but I think that you're in a decent position to figure things out because you have a good group of starters and you have a couple of players that have experience behind them. Now we get to the schedule. The schedule is going to be tough. There's no easy way to put it. And I honestly, when you're looking at what this group could do, it's hard for me to find wins, but also at the same time, you kind of have to keep things relative because you're not going 12 and 0. There's just no way this group goes 12 and 0. But I think there's a good chance they get over the 4.5 wins. Because to me, even with the floor, to me, if everything's going wrong, I still think they win 3 games. And that's close to that 4.5 win total. I just don't think that they're going to only win 3 games. Because Miami is going to be a tough one right off the bat. That is going to be a tone setter for the entire season. That's a rivalry game for this Florida team. Everyone's going to be ready for that one. You have to play strong because if you don't show up, it's going to be a long year. Then you get Samford. That's going to be a win. Texas A&M at home is going to be tough, but that is another opportunity to shock some people. That's really you have 2 games in the first 3 that give you opportunities to showcase what you can do and showcase if this is going to be a successful season or if it's going to be a long one. At Mississippi State. Mississippi State is going to be one of the bottom feeders probably this year of the SEC. So that should be a game that even if it's on the road, Florida should win that game. You have to find a way to win it. UCF at home. UCF is going to be plenty motivated. They are going to be ready to shock Florida and hit them in the mouth. Florida has to be ready. And Florida should be a team that can handle that test. It's just you need to treat them like you treated Miami. You have to treat them like they are are just as dangerous, which they are, to be completely honest. Whether Florida fans want to agree with that or not, they are. You'll also have Tennessee on the road the next week. That's tough. Honestly, the second half of the schedule is pretty brutal because you have Kentucky, Georgia at Texas, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, and at Florida State. Finding 6 wins on that schedule requires maybe a tiny bit of delusion, but also I think it requires a good amount of confidence. And I think that if things go really well, 7-5 is definitely attainable. I think realistically, though, that is the ceiling. Maybe 8 wins. I could hear an argument for that, but that's assuming a lot of things. So you need certain pieces to step up. You need certain players to step up. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm definitely here for a Florida surprise. A 7-5 season probably gets Billy Napier in the coach of the year conversations. Nate probably gets him the award for sure, like undisputed, unanimous. He is going to be definitely off the hot seat and definitely in a place where Florida feels really good about the future of their program. But there's some things that need to get sorted out. Certain positions need to find depth. Certain positions need to take steps forward, and we'll see what happens. I think that you're really excited if you're Florida. I think that you're in a decent spot, and I think that there shows, despite what everybody's been saying, there should still be plenty of optimism surrounding this program. It's just going to be a tough battle, and you don't really. I think you shouldn't be surprised by that. This shouldn't be unexpected, that it's going to be difficult, that things will be a little bit more challenging because you're in the SEC. But at the same time, you have plenty of weapons in your arsenal to be able to move forward and make explosive plays. And it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. If it goes well, Billy Napier is going to be in a very different light than when things started this year.